Hi everybody.
The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Hi everyone. Can you all hear me? Well,
The
just
proceeding
about.
will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Hi.
The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Hello. Let's have a look.
The proceeding will start shortly.
Welcome to Lord Johnson
Here we go.
of Lainston, and I think Rob Cook, who is the Deputy Director for
Hello, I
CPTPP.
full screen now.
We welcome you very much to this evidence session of the International Agreements Committee. You've been given a list of the interests declared by members of the committee. The meeting is being broadcast live via the parliamentary website. A transcript of the meeting will be made available and published on the committee website, but you'll have the opportunity to make corrections to that transcript where necessary.
There we
With
go.
that welcome, I'll proceed to the first question, if I may.
Here we go.
And then
Hi
other members of the
everyone.
committee will ask questions. In the inquiry that we've had so far, we've been asking our respondents to tell us, what they see as the benefits and possible risks in relation to the CP. I've been doing it very well. CPTPP.
There's two
But I wonder if we
debates
could get
today.
it.
I got to learn to talk again
directly
because I
from
got
you,
my new
please,
teeth
Minister.
in.
What do you see as the risks and benefits of membership of CPTPP?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Lord Goldsmith, and thank you to all of you for your continued engagement, both in this forum but also throughout the passage of the bill through the House of Lords. Many of you have a significant interest and a huge amount of experience in trade, investment and international treaty making, and so I'm very grateful to you for, frankly, the questions you asked me and the support you've shown me. I mean, I think for me, CPTPP represents a very important component of the government's post-Brexit vision of Britain, in the sense that we want to create new trade routes for our goods and services. And CPTPP, unlike direct trade relationships, for example, the ones we negotiated with Australia and New Zealand, gives us access to a plurilateral group of nations who have a very clear view that they want to expand and increase the amount of trade they do between the countries.
There are
and
two
restrictions
debates.
accordingly. And it's attractive for us to be a member because it's a modern agreement. And so it's been designed with the modern age in mind, particularly concepts such as digital services and also covering very important areas such as the environment, which probably historic treaties may not have done. So I think the real benefit for the UK is to firstly access this plurilateral fora, which I think will give us enormous benefit in terms of linking ourselves into these 11 other nations. And on top of that, we have, which is not to be ignored, effectively signed a free trade agreement with Malaysia particularly, and of course Brunei as well, which is something that I think is important for the UK, and it's a very efficient way of aligning us with a nation that has huge affinity for the UK, where we do quite a significant amount of business, where there's a great deal of investment that I see coming from Malaysia into the UK, and where previously quite restrictive tariff barriers prevented us from selling effectively into that market goods such as chocolate and whiskey and so on.
Thank you very much. So just so that those listening are clear about this, the reason that you single out Malaysia and Brunei is because those are the two countries
Of the
with which we don't currently have free trade arrangements.
That's correct.
Yes. I think just if I may push a little bit further, as I say, one of the things we've learnt during the course of our evidence sessions is people think it's a good thing. They're very positive about joining, but they're less clear as to what the actual benefits are. And I just wonder, therefore, whether you could, if we could get from the government's view, exactly the benefits. You've identified some of them now. Is there anything else you think we could?
Well, yes. It's not, given the constraints of the time of this committee, and there's a question further on about how do we.
There's
make
two
sure we
debates
utilise
on
FTAs
in the House
effectively.
today.
We do need to make sure that the benefits are clearly projected into the UK.
The
So
one
free
we
trade
want
relations
is on
very
just
important.
after
It
this.
accounts for a significant amount of our trade. I can't remember the exact details, but it's a significantly important market for certain of our agricultural goods, such as whiskey and chocolate. But we also are entering into a structure that, when you consider the complexities of modern trade, give us huge advantages when dealing with the issue around rules of origin. So there are generous rules of origin provisions that enable us to source components from CPTPP countries, allow the goods to move around as they do in terms of the production cycle, and benefit from the inter-country tariff-free quota access, which I think is very important. You know, we want a simpler life for our goods and services without having to sign up necessarily to onerous governance issues, which clearly were an issue with the European Union before this.
Lord Marland.
Yes, thank you, Minister, very much indeed, and thank you for being so open with us. Clearly, there is a keenness and willingness to include other countries into this trade agreement, and I think as a group we're slightly concerned that if China rears its ugly head, which has been muted, and the relationship that might have with Taiwan, or whether you would do Taiwan without China, but it is politically quite challenging.
Well, I'm very sensitive about commenting.
We want the
whilst we're
debate
still
that's on next.
undergoing the accession process to a multilateral forum in terms of other entrants. There are, I think, 6 or 7 other countries, 6 countries that have said that they wish to apply. Maybe they've made the formal application. I'm not sure of the details. And it's up to us, once we've joined, to then opine on new members. As I said in the committee stage debate earlier this week, the standards for application are extremely high. To give you an understanding, there was a particular focus on the UK in terms of our relationship with state-owned enterprises in relation to state ownership of Channel 4. Just to give you an example of the levels of discussion and detail to which we went to prove that we were of the highest possible standards to join the CPTPP group. And it's important that members of this committee and Parliament in general and the body politic are aware of the fact that new accession comes as part of a consensus-driven approach, which is important. So, you know, the group, and this is something that maybe I should have said when we discussed the advantages. You know, we are going to be in one of the biggest free trade blocs in the world, and we will have an opportunity to help define the rules and set the structures around which the future of trade is based. And so, you know, I want to get us in there, and then absolutely right to have discussions around future accession countries. But what we have absolutely assured this House on this, and I'd like to assure this committee on, is if there was a new country to accede into CPTPP, we would see that as a fundamental change of the FTA agreement, and it would go through the CRAG process. So Parliament would have an opportunity to...
Is everyone else is okay, innit?
Lady Kingsmill, come in, please.
I'm interested
Don't
to hear
worry
that
what's
you
going
think
on
it could
in
be
your
of
own
influence. We are a little late
other
to the
countries,
party
as long as they're
in joining
okay.
this trade agreement. And many of the structures and rules have been already established on an American model. To what extent do you think we're going to be able to be influential in these circs?
Well, it wouldn't be for me to be disrespectful to suggest we're late to the party. We're the first member of the party. We're the first new acceding member since the organisation was established. So I think that's a very powerful thing. We are the first new member, which I think gives us a great deal of leverage, to be honest, in terms of bringing newness to approaches that we think are relevant. There's currently a review going on, or it's about to start, maybe in early January, of a review of 5 years of CPTPP as it stands. Now, being done by the parties, which we've been invited to participate in. Obviously, we're not a fully acceded member, but it's a very powerful signal to us in terms of how we are expected to be treated when we're asked to participate at this level, to feed in ideas in terms of the way it can evolve. It's not for me to comment on what they might be now, but suggested areas would certainly be, you know, how have we dealt with the advance of digital trade in the last 5 years? You know, things have changed. You know, cryptocurrencies, new methods of transactions, digital signatures, and so on. So, you know, we will definitely be looking to feed in terms of how we continue to modernise the agreement. And I've enjoyed very much the debates we've had in this House about some other areas which may not be covered in some of the countries. For example, artist resale rights, which aren't in, I think, half of the countries that we've signed up with the CPTPP. How can we bring our influence to bear in their own domestic markets? And then there are issues around, you know, the environment. And I believe firmly that the Australia-New Zealand trade deal saw improved animal welfare and environmental standards being introduced into Australia on account of the fact that we were negotiating an FTA, and we use that as powerful leverage to drive behavioural change so people were more aligned with us.
Thank you. Can I move to Lord Udney Lister, please?
Yeah, you've sort of touched on this already, and I wanted to ask you really about the review of 2024 and really where we're going to go. Where do you see us going? And how do you see the UK using its influence to change and develop the CPTPP further?
Thank you, Alderman Lister. Apologies, I have to some extent answered that. I think maybe to give some fresh perspective, I might ask my colleague Rob, who's the chief negotiator, to just talk about some of the general areas. Again, we're not looking to talk about sort of leverage points, but there are clearly areas of the advance of trade systems that would probably be useful to cover.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. You've elevated me, actually. I'm the Deputy Chief Negotiator.
You've been promoted.
Exactly, yeah, thank you very much.
Good to come to this committee, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, look, a quick bit of background on the general review. So CPTPP parties were supposed to review the agreement 3 years after entry into force, but that was delayed for various reasons, including COVID and that sort of thing. But New Zealand have really grasped the nettle this year, and they've agreed a terms of reference, which we helped shape. And the review itself is going to kick off in the first half of next year. And it's about looking at where we might update and enhance the agreement to sort of, we always talk about CPTPP being the gold standard. So it's about looking for where CPTPP might need to be enhanced or updated to still be the gold standard deal. We started thinking about what our priorities will be, but we want to engage with stakeholders to make sure that we've understood their priorities as well. So I don't want to get ahead of that process. We're going to be having a period of engagement with stakeholders starting, I hope, in January. But as the Minister said, when we meet with and talk to other CPTPP parties, and I was doing that in New Zealand just last week, some of the common themes that we hear from them is about updating or thinking about how the digital economy chapter can be kept more up to date, thinking about how the world's moved on the environment since CPTPP was first agreed. So these are areas where the UK has expertise and interest. And going back to what the Minister was saying before about how we can influence in the deal, we're the second largest economy in CPTPP. So we definitely do have an influence, and I'm already seeing that in the meetings that I'm in. Two sort of important bits to bear in mind, though, as we go into the general review process. One is that we do think this is already a well-functioning high standards agreement. So this isn't about, we're not sort of talking about major change or ripping up what's already there. We joined it because we think it's a really good, well-functioning high standards agreement. And of course, any changes in the general review process are going to need consensus amongst all 12 members, which is always difficult. So I expect any changes resulting from the process will be quite targeted and focused, but we're looking forward to engaging in it.
Lord Fox.
Have you looked at all about mutual recognition of qualifications, for example? Because that's a key driver of services industries and would be one that perhaps could be part of the review going forward.
I mean, not to cut across, I think that's a very important point, and so that comes from some of the benefits of CPTPP. I mean, what's useful for us are the various different committees relating to CPTPP, and there's a professional services group, a committee on financial services, entry for business persons, and so on. So there are quite a few areas in which those sorts of concepts can be discussed, and there's something specific you want to add.
I'd just add that the services chapter to CPTPP has an annex which is about sort of working together on recognition of professional services qualifications and so on. So those opportunities are built into CPTPP already, but we've only just arrived, but we'll be interested to see what conversations are already going on in that space and whether there's more that can be done.
It's been put to us, Minister, that because there is no standing secretariat for CPTPP, a greater load falls on the member countries, of it. I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK to shape the future direction of this, but that would obviously going to be resource intensive for your department, going forward. Do you think the department will put in place sufficient resources in order to have an influence in the CPTPP commensurate with our kind of standing and economic position going forward?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, absolutely. I mean, I think we have a team already around the negotiation, which how many is it, 12?
Yeah, around 12 or 13.
With yourself included.
Yeah.
And
Come on, get to the relevant debate.
Sorry. Can I carry on? Yes.
Just carry on.
So there's a
Sorry for
there's a
interrupting.
secretariat which moves around according with the leadership, with the president, so whatever it's called, the chair of the CPTPP group, which is just in the same way that you would have a G7 or G20, whatever, as you will have a lot of experience, Lord Grimston, and that's an important part of it. But you're right. I think that if we can ensure that we continue to dedicate resource to this point, it will allow us to provide extra leverage in terms of the inputs, because clearly, if the people are willing to do the work and provide the background, that will help. That's a well-made point, and it's the sort of thing that I definitely would encourage, and we have to hope we can have the resource post-accession to ensure that we can contribute in the way we'd want to.
I've got a number of requests.
Slap him in the head, innit?
Lady Hayter, Lord Howell, Lord Watts, and Lord Kerr. Yes, in that order, please.
It's the other side of that. Without a full-time secretariat of CPTPP, it is quite an onus on that, and it was going to get more complicated when we're in, and possibly others. Might one of the things in the review you be looking at is whether that is actually satisfactory, or whether CPTPP is going to need its own secretariat rather than it rely on whoever holds the presidency at the time.
Well, that's a very reasonable point to make, and I'm sure it's the sort of issue that's arisen in discussion amongst party members. I mean, I think on the one hand, instinctively, I wouldn't necessarily be pro creating an additional bureaucracy, but we do want to make sure that all parties can provide the resourcing to ensure that this can function. But then if you look at other trade deals, you wouldn't necessarily have a standing FTA unit around, for example, the Australia-New Zealand free trade deals. That will come under normal business as usual of the department. But I take Lord Grimston's point that we want to make sure that we are properly resourced in order that we can give the input that we want, and I think that would be respected by our fellow members.
Lord Howell.
So I really wanted to widen Lord Lister's question about our organisation, this end, as it were. I mean, this is really a pan-governmental story, isn't it? It's a very big story indeed, of which actual trade details are only a small part. I mean, I get the impression the Ministry of Defence, for instance, wants to link up the whole of its own defence industry developments and supply chains with the economic side as well. That's, over at the Foreign FCDO, they talk more and more about soft power as being the way into our relations with all these very fast-growing countries in an area as well. There's going to be the most growth over the next 30 years. And it seems that we really are thinking in terms of almost all departments being involved in all this. Now, is that your impression too? And is Whitehall moving towards organising a really powerful force that covers all the ground, not just the trade itself, but the defence, the soft power, and indeed the energy and green expansion, which is an enormous part of our trade and going to be bigger still? Are all these things under the grip of one organisational approach?
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that it is not under the grip of one organisational approach, because with your great experience, Lord Howell, you know the British government doesn't necessarily work in that way, and not necessarily to a specific concept such as the FTA. But is there cross?
Welcome everybody, Kingsdale, Clark, Lisa, Matthew, Paul, everyone else.
Absolutely. But of course,
thanks for joining.
Each individual country.
We're just waiting for
this group with shared benefits through giving
the debate
access to each other's markets. It's not
on after this one.
Union or its own defined nation. It is indeed just a grouping and a set of rules that we want to apply to. So some countries we're going to have obviously even more enhanced relationships with. Some we're just at the beginning of that relationship. So I think making the most of that is not just the focus of a specific group, but actually all our posts overseas. So when I travel around CPTPP countries, which I've recently done and do continually, the fabulous teams we have on the ground, led by our ambassadors and high commissioners, are the ones who we particularly focus on in order to maximise the benefits of these relationships.
Before we move to the next topic, I've got requests from Lord Kerr and from Lord Lister to come in on this topic.
I'm thinking of the general review. The climate change provisions in our agreement with Australia are not particularly strong. Given the change of government and change policy in Australia, Australians might be keener to go further now. They are, however, these provisions are stronger than those in CTPTP. Will we be seeking in the general review stronger climate change provisions?
Well, I wouldn't know the answer to that in the sense we haven't yet participated in the review. We need to understand what the agenda is that we can participate in. But I do refer back to my earlier point about how I believe strongly that the relationship with Australia will continue to deepen in terms of climate change and animal welfare. And that is one of the reasons why we should be pushing ahead with the free trade agenda, because even if today the framework or the policy agenda may not be as strong as we want it to be, we've entered into a framework that allows us to have these discussions and show mutual benefit in terms of production standards, which effectively is what this goes back to, that will allow us to push change because it will be worth the while of the interlocutor nation. So, I mean, I'm very, very positive about the opportunities for us to make sure that we are aligned when it comes to driving our agenda around vital issues such as climate change. But it's not for me to say now what we're going to bring up in the necessary reviews. But I'm sure there'll be a mechanism for a discussion of the review. I'm not sure how the process works, but.
Will you be publishing a white paper or something before the review, saying what you're hoping to get out of it?
No, well, it's a fair point to raise that. I don't believe we are. I don't know if Rob's got any more information on this.
For now, we're just looking to open a period of engagement with our stakeholders. I don't think we've determined exactly how it will work after that. This is a unique process that the UK has not taken part in before, and the CPTPP parties are also working out exactly how it's going to function. So, beyond opening our period of engagement with our stakeholders, I don't have anything to add on that.
I just really wanted to follow this point up a little bit further. I mean, there is a rotation of chairmanship which does take place. You equated it a bit to G7, G20 type arrangements. But the great thing about the G7, G20 type arrangements, which again also have rotating chairs and different countries at different points in time, is that by and large the UK team remains pretty constant. And in fact, it's at a pretty senior level in the Cabinet Office. So there is a lot of top-down control on this. And
you see a bottle of vodka there, Susie?
CPTPP is more akin to that, and I hadn't really thought about it properly before, than a normal free trade agreement where you do have only a periodic review. This is going to have stuff every year. There's going to be things happening. I mean, excuse me saying it this way, but normally we in your department, you do rotate people quite a bit. Are we going to see a degree of consistency and at a senior enough level to deal with this?
I'm surprised.
We have a dedicated team who doesn't, which is
the debate
a significant number
is
of
actually going to
I
go on that late.
Some very senior people on the team, but don't forget we also have to combine that with the diplomatic missions on the ground too, who will be feeding in specifically. And I think using G7 or whatever as an example is probably only partially useful because they are two very different things. And this is a treaty structure. The committees, I think there are 19 committees that are the most important, the important mechanisms for discussion and evolution. They meet on the whole, I think, every 2 years. But that is pragmatically managed. I think the idea is they'll probably end up meeting more frequently than that. I think some already have. We have to feel our way here. I mean, this is an exciting opportunity for the UK. We're signing up. We're not signing up to it's a multilateral trade fora. It isn't a union of nations. This is very important. So in terms of sort of secretariats and governance, I think we have to be quite careful about what we think we're entering into. This is a huge opportunity for us to benefit from lower tariffs and greater market access. And the teams who I would recommend we retain established presence in the DBT are those that can assist in helping drive that agenda forward and try and find more ways for mutually beneficial trade and access, rather than necessarily having a more significant agenda than that. We should probably be best placed in another forum.
We need to move on to another topic because we're very time limited today. So
Here we go. I think this is our topic.
Investor-state dispute settlement. Some of the evidence we've got suggests that there's some uncertainty out there about what is our government's policy on ISDS. I think the committee rather shares that uncertainty. We don't have ISDS in the deals with Australia and New Zealand because both countries don't believe in it. We do have ISDS in this agreement. Some of the evidence, all of which was sort of defensive, wasn't much discussion, I can recall, of how we might make offensive market opening use of ISDS. It was how foreign firms might interfere in our regulatory process or try to through ISDS. And it was suggested that the Canadian firms might be particularly litigious. I personally don't share this worry, but what is the government's view? Presumably some advised you that it would be a good idea to have a side letter disapplying it for...
Thanks for joining, guys.
For Canada. You decided not to do that, or the
It is waffle.
Didn't agree
Yes,
a side letter.
I know.
What is the government's policy?
They're doddery old farts, aren't they?
We're comfortable using any mechanism that we can in order to protect our UK investor base, investing in the rest of the world and in treaty countries. That's the priority from my point of view, although I'm responsible for foreign direct investment. The second priority is to make sure that the international investment community sees the UK as a stable and consistent environment to make their investments, and there's a strong degree of rule of law and predictability. And I think ISDSs do that quite well. We've never shied away from signing an ISDS. Some countries, I think Australia and New Zealand, didn't want to have ISDSs, so they carved them out. As far as I'm aware, Canada didn't ask for a carve-out. I've never personally really understood that. I rather agree with you, Lorca. I've never understood the great fear of ISDSs. The UK has never had a single country. Allegedly, we had one successful case when we were in a joint action, but I don't think we've ever, as a single country, ever had a successful ISDS case brought against us. We run a very effective rule of law process. I think we wouldn't want to derogate that by suggesting that we wouldn't sign up to these systems in any way, and it protects our investments. The UK businesses' investments around the world, which are significant, and it's very important that we project the mission when negotiating these treaties, that we are willing to sign up to mechanisms that will protect our investments overseas.
India is perhaps a paradigm case. Are we pressing for ISDS in the negotiations with the Indians?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. But I would have certainly thought that how we protect our international investments is considered when we're looking at all our treaty opportunities around the world. I mean, how you do it differs from nation to nation, and clearly, that's part of the negotiations, I would suppose. But I can't comment on the India negotiations. I'm not party to them.
I say paradigm case because of the sad history of companies like Cairn being screwed in
Well, I think we had an ISDS, or they had ISDS obligations to certain countries, which I think then no longer continue. I'm not sure of the details.
In principle, we're in favour of ISDS.
We are, absolutely.
And it isn't in the Australia deal because the Australians didn't want it.
Well, that's my assumption, yes. I mean, we think that they give us a strong opportunity to protect our investor base when investing internationally, and we have nothing to fear when it comes from investors investing in the UK. And the very fact we signed up to CPTPP or are signing up to it with ISDS provisions in that treaty, I think proves that point.
Okay.
But so if I may say, Chairman, just yes. Briefly, there are other mechanisms. There are other investor protection mechanisms that can be included in treaties. The ISDS is one piece. Clearly, it's an established route, but there may be more evolved modern ways that we can achieve our goals whilst giving the protections we want.
Could I just ask? We are aware, aren't we, that China has 60 or 70 investment agreements.
They spend more time waffling than actually
all the time. And
doing anything.
The same amount, have we? With our, and particularly with Commonwealth countries. What they call the BITs, are they called?
BITs.
British Investment Agreements.
No, bilateral investment
treaties.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that
question. How long ago
did
they say we have to move on? It's got to be 10 minutes.
The Chinese, you are aware of what they're doing.
Well, I'm aware of their. They have a very significant international trade. Project, yes. I mean, we need to make sure that we stand alone in our own right, in our own way, though, by making sure that we drive forward these opportunities to sign up to these treaty fora. And that's why I'm grateful to committee members' help for making sure we can pass this bill through the House as soon as possible.
Thank you. Lord Johnson, may I just ask this? Couple of questions to which you said you don't know the answer. Would you be willing to go back, and if you're able to find the answer and willing to divulge it, you could write to the committee, or your office could write to the committee?
I watched it
I'm sure what I wasn't
last week, wasn't it? When they said they didn't know a lot of the answers, they had to go back.
At the transcript, you can see.
And about India?
Well, I wouldn't comment on negotiations. I'm sure you understand that or anything that would be considered sensitive. But if there's any factual areas that you want me to update, I'd be delighted to do that.
All I was going to ask you to do is to look at the transcript and see if there's anything else you could say.
Chairman, I
That's
always
all.
do this, and I'm pleased to do that.
I ought just to underline, I've declared my interest in investment treaty and things like that because of the legal practice that I have.
Yeah.
That again.
Yeah. He's got
We'll move on then,
he's got
please,
vested
to
interest
Lord
in it.
Raffles.
Look, it's the whole thing, like
Can I come
Michelle
back
Moon
to
and things like
trading
that.
opportunities that come from CPTPP? I mean, I have bored my colleagues with every witness who's come before us to ask them what they think the opportunities are. As you know even better than me, your own numbers showed that the current trading opportunities for CPTPP were under 0.1% addition to GDP. Every witness we've had, and I may say including you, sir, and also your colleague said this was the gold standard of trading opportunities, which is the gold standard of trading agreements. Well, at the moment, the gold standard of trading agreements is going to produce under 0.1% to our GDP. My question really is, put it in a different way, are you setting up, is there a standing team with responsibility to increase our trading opportunities under CPTPP? Because clearly everybody thinks, including you, that this is going to have huge trading opportunities. But does the government think they have a role in that? And if so, do they have a team to try and make
fingerprints? I don't know, but IDs.
Absolutely,
I can see them bringing in IDs and playing on the whole migrant. They're saying if we ID everybody, it'd be easier to identify migrants.
The make brand which projects quality exports.
I don't know about
the
fingerprints.
sort of
They have biometrics in passports now, so
export advisors,
who knows?
international trade advisors located around the country.
And with the level of information that's being shared between agencies now,
we have our trade envoys.
Even the likes of the police national computer. Not only do the police have access to that computer,
in order to help our exporters.
DWP got access to certain departments.
We have export mentoring, and we have various different
other places have got access to it.
At the end of the day, if I can be just very open about one point, it isn't solely the government,
as they say,
is responsible for helping
sharing
export.
Is caring.
The issue actually is a cultural change in order to have more companies who wish to export in the first place. So it's not a limitation of our services, although clearly we could always do more and put more resources in if it was felt useful. It's the sheer nature of the fact as a percentage of our overall company total, we have a lower percentage than most European countries, for example, in terms of those companies that should export that do. So I'm hoping that our trade agenda, such as CPTPP,
the RFID. Look how many people use the RFID now within appliances, their washing machines, their fridge freezers, their baths even. You know what I mean? They're going to be able to suck this on the people so easy, it's unreal.
And presumably everything you just said would apply without CTPPP to the relationships with all those other countries. What I'm trying to get at is what specifically we think this agreement will add to what we already have with those countries. I know people say, well, Malaysia is a big opportunity, we don't have a trading agreement. But leaving that aside, what does this add, and will there be a team to try and ensure specifically that this treaty?
But with the DWP, the DWP don't contact them.
There will be that work done.
With the big six banks, they have said if people who are on benefits go over the threshold of savings, it is the obligation of the banks to inform the DWP that you've exceeded the threshold. Not the DWP looking in your bank, it's your bank giving them that information.
It's very important. it's an area that I think is worthy of challenge. It's very difficult, actually, to sort of clearly market benefits of complex trade treaties. So this is work to do. I'm confident that the department is doing it. I think we've done it quite successfully in terms of Australia, New Zealand, in terms of promoting that. We'll have to see how that works when we look back in a year or two's time. But a challenge well made. We're very aware of it, but it's absolutely right that we market our opportunities successfully, given the structure that we have.
Just a
Minister, you've mentioned rules of origin twice, and the first time you said that it was a tremendous opportunity. So I'm assuming your department has done some analysis around which particular industries and which particular manufacturing sectors in the UK will benefit from this rules of origin opportunity. So it would be really helpful, I think, in answer some of Lord Razzle's questions about which industries your department has identified as being particularly likely to benefit from the rules of origin opportunity.
Certainly. I mean, the first industry we think particularly is manufacturing, the auto industry and associated industries around there. I'm happy, and it might be quite helpful for me to put together some more advanced, some more detail on this, if that's useful for you, and send that to the committee. And it's a good exercise. But it's really, it's advanced manufacturing in terms of moving components around the CPTPP countries and selling them within the CPTPP countries and then exporting them outside that grouping that will be most useful for us. Because clearly, rules of origin is relevant for that area, which is why one of the particular reasons why we've been so excited about it.
I might just add, Minister, on rules of origin. I mean, part of the thing about having these new opportunities is that there's the potential for creating new supply chains and new opportunities that British businesses might not have previously seen would have been there as well. So you can't just do that static analysis. You've also got to think about the dynamic picture of who might want to take up an opportunity that wasn't previously available.
I'm going to move to Lord Watts, but I can see that Lord Howell's very keen to ask a question.
Just a slight correction of myself of a moment ago. I was referring to bilateral investment treaties. I said business investment treaties.
Yes.
Bilateral, I'm sure you recognise, which we've got with a great many countries, including several of these countries as well.
We have a number of them.
But presumably on the question you're now discussing, the team which has already given us the whole AUKUS setup and the Japanese combat aircraft setup, which involves a huge new range of supply chains and component chains and multilateral arrangements. Presumably they're all tied in with this. I mean, this is the same story, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, they will benefit from this, absolutely. And I'm delighted that that's the case. But I mean, that is, these are separate pieces of work with different departments trying to make the most of the relationships. And that's why we're keen to join the CPTPP, because I think it'll give us additional advantages.
Lord Watts, please, you had a question in relation to...
I think it's been mostly covered about the team that you're setting up to actually exploit the benefits from this. Have you anything else to say about that? Is there something specific that will drive the sorts of figures that people have been bandying around? Because as we've heard before, the figures are relatively low. Now, there may be opportunities for it, but then that will need investment, won't it, in time and effort if you're going to achieve that aim of boosting trade in this area.
Well, just to make a sort of clarification, I don't think in 2 years' time we would have necessarily a specific CPTPP team. We tend to work in our department on sort of sector.
Have they got on to the main event yet, or are we still
that's
waiting?
Probably the best way of making the most.
Sounds like we're still waiting.
Opportunities in terms of sort of specialist knowledge. On top of that, you then have the various different campaigns that would have to be tailored to CPTPP, so it would require dedication of resources. I welcome these questions being raised. It allows me to go back to the department and talk to the Treasury about the opportunities that could be afforded us if they supported us a little more, and I'm completely on your side on that. But we will, the resource will be there, and making the most of the FTA, the Secretary of State, Kemi Badenoch, says every time
Kingsdale, they've already... once government have got them out of the hotels and put them into local authority, it's local authority's responsibility, not central government's, is it?
Lord Grimstone wants us to come
just a very quick point. We were told by the...
As soon as they get them out of the hotels and get them placed within the community, they're building houses opposite me now. And
they have to declare whether they're exporting
and that's
it
council
under
houses.
the Australia Free Trade Agreement or under the CPTPP. And I suspect that would require a very elaborate algorithm in the case of some of these firms, to work out what is the most beneficial agreement to take advantage of.
They have, in your own home.
Complicated, the process that was...
They tried that ages ago, wasn't it? How's a migrant?
Which the department is able to do.
That's why all these landlords
are more of a routine thing, that if a business
putting them into HMOs, changing their houses into HMOs, because at the end of the day, there's no rental cap.
That's a very good point. It is.
You know, you've got a rental cap within local government. If you're a refugee or an asylum seeker, there's no rental cap on the amount of rent you can charge.
Not on that specifically. I think the
you
key
tell
point
me,
is,
if you're a landlord,
we do know that this is complex for businesses, and that's why
give
we're
it to an English person, whereby if he applied for benefits, he would be capped on the amount of rent he would be able to claim.
So we're thinking
then
really carefully. We've got dedicated
getting your rent paid by the government, and there's
sure
no cap on the amount of rent you can charge. You know,
you're aware of the evidence we've had, for example.
There's a lot of ruthless people out there that are just buying property who are actually English, British, Irish, whatever you want to call them. You know, from every, even the indigenous people. They're buying property and then fucking off.
Comments being made, but as I said, that's why yesterday I went
they see their countries going to the shitter. They see central governments not doing anything, so they're jumping on the bandwagon and fucking buying property, leasing it to the government, and then fucking off and living a life of luxury in another country. They know their countries are finished.
I wondered, just to move on slightly to a different area, how will
anyway,
the UK's commitment arising out of this agreement interact with the wider UK-EU trading relationship? I mean, are there any commitments which will affect the future of our trading partnership with the EU?
Well, every treaty that we negotiate is negotiated in light of our existing obligations. That's very important, and many of these obligations have most favoured nation clauses in them, which result in ratchets up if we give more favourable treatment to other.
You go to a bank and you're a landlord already and say, well, look, I want to convert my property into this. I've said this ages ago. I've got a guaranteed income for the next 5 years, or how many X amount of years they've got. You know, I need this mortgage on this property. The bank's got to go, because it's a done deal. It's just a cash transaction. You know, the central government gives it to the landlord gives it back to the bank, and he's quids in, isn't he?
Treaty arrangements, trade arrangements?
Well, no, I would say that our relationship with our European counterparts is extremely important. Our most significant trading partners, and we have negotiated, I think, successfully a very workable agreement that clearly can evolve into the future. At the same time, we're trying to create trade routes with the rest of the world as well. In fact, as many trade routes as we can to reduce friction as much as we can. But that has to be done in light of existing treaties. It also has to be done in light with our World Trade Organization obligations and other multi-party obligations that cover a range of different areas.
Being that many of the countries with which we would wish to trade via this trade arrangement will already have got individual arrangements with the EU. So the point is that there may very well be clashes that could arise. Is that going to impact on us, or have you done any work to indicate whether or not it is likely to impact on our arrangements?
I think my colleague wishes to come in.
Thank you. So I think it's worth flagging that during the negotiations, we thought carefully about things like whether there would be any conflicts with existing international agreements, including with the EU, and that actually led to certain things that we secured in the negotiations precisely because we'd taken that into account. So, for
being
example,
called racist, mate, it means fuck all nowadays. It's just bounded around like there's no tomorrow. It took the whole meaning out what racist means.
Meant contravening our obligations to the EU, and so we got a footnote essentially that meant that we didn't need to do that, which was matched to one that Canada already had as well, so that they didn't have to essentially match to what they already had. We ensured that we got a provision in our accession protocol which meant that the Windsor framework could operate fully, so we were taking that into account in our accession. That was something that the CPTPP parties were happy to agree to, and this isn't the EU, but just thinking about sort of the wider European relationship, or being European sort of focused, we made sure that we didn't have to diverge from any provisions in the European Patent Convention. There was this issue about intellectual property grace periods, which some people will have heard about, where we made sure that that we didn't have to diverge. So we were taking into account all of these sort of other international obligations as we negotiated our accession.
Thank you.
Lord Grimstone.
Minister, always a great pleasure to have you in front of us. Unusually, to give the government a chance to show off a bit, I mean, what aspects of the agreement are you most proud of? When you look at the totality of the agreement, what points would you particularly like to draw attention to the committee as something which you think a jolly good job was done on for the UK?
Well, thank you very much for your gracious compliments. It's a very hard act to follow, as we know, with the previous investment minister, who was hailed as a genius. The issue, of course, here is we're not really negotiating an FTA in the conventional sense. We're joining an existing multi-four-party agreement. So that's not the same as in terms of sort of where did we have red lines and negotiations. It isn't really like that. There are specific measures that we had to put in place, as my colleague commented on, in order to make sure that we didn't derogate our existing responsibilities.
Is no one going to talk about the big fucking elephant that's in this room at the moment? They're talking about trade deals, right? Yeah, they got to be able to get those supplies and those trades to this country. And the state of the Suez Canal at the moment, they ain't got to open out, and no one's even mentioning the big grey elephant in the room.
Which signals an enormously powerful new route for the UK. I'm not using this podium as an opportunity to grandstand, but it is a different relationship to our historical relationship with the European Union, and I think it's an extremely attractive one. Well, yes, we lower our barriers in exchange for access to other nations, whilst at the same time preserving our independence and sitting around the table as participants equal to the others, and I think that's a hugely exciting opportunity for us. Clearly, as I say, the challenge which you've raised, which I hear, is we have to make the most of it in terms of promoting the benefits to our British businesses at times when it's highly complex, and that clearly is work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Lord Kerr and then Baroness Hayter.
On your last point, Minister, which I strongly agree with, the importance of promoting it to British business, getting them to understand it. Coming back to the suggestion from Lord Watts, you said that relations with business and industry tend to be on a sectoral basis, and I understand that. It's always been like that. But isn't there a case for a task force? Because by definition, none of the sectoral experts will be real experts on CTPTP. It's the greater ease of selling to Malaya, for example, or the new opportunities that might arise for new sales that need to be got across to, particularly to small and medium-sized businesses. I myself think there might, although the benefits nationally are probably fairly marginal, I do think that if we are going to maximise the returns of being in CTPTP, a serious effort is required. Now, you're saying the same, that there will be such an effort. I think all I'm saying is, are you sure it shouldn't be on a specific CTPTP task force basis, rather than expecting your various sectoral operations to learn about CTP and pass it on?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there will be, there's an important coordinating role to be played by
Malaysia.
But actually, sector by sector makes sense for me, because if you look at agriculture, for example, the agricultural attaches will have specific knowledge based around the products that we can sell and the new opportunities that we have because of CPTPP. Some sectors will have more obvious trade advantages for us than others, and some will need further development. So I'm agnostic as to how we do it to some extent. What I'm saying is that currently we happen to run it through more of a sectoral specialist bent, linked in with the country on-the-ground country teams, which are can be more agnostic, although they cover broad sectors in general, because that's where the expertise comes. When I find myself doing work, I like to rely on officials who know the industry. They know the key people in the industry, and they know where the advantages are in the UK in terms of trying to export into that industry. And so it strikes me as common sense. But yes, I'm hearing a very clear message that I completely agree with noble lords on, that we want to make sure that we take advantage of the FTA. The Secretary of State's very clear about that, and the whole department is aware of it. And we need to make sure we dedicate resource to it. But we also, as Lord Grimston says, we need to use AI and new technology in order to get our message out, because we're looking at trying to get millions or hundreds of thousands of businesses to take advantage of these complex trade treaties. And that's not just the work
Did he
of
just
a
say
unit,
AI?
a well-resourced team, however well-resourced it is. And we need your help to sell the message as well.
Thank you very much.
In what capacity will they be using AI?
The sector by sector, of course, doesn't help. I think it's half our exporters who are SMEs.
They will be in a sector, though. That sector would be like autos, advanced manufacturing, defence.
There will be SMEs in much more specific areas than the big ones. I mean, agriculture and autos, they're fine, and they've got big departments, all those. I think some of the smaller SMEs, particularly in services. And actually, my question, I just ought to say that I am on the board of the ABI, because clearly the services sector is important to this. But my question's a different one. You in particular, Minister, I think have been very supportive.
Was the whole debate on yesterday, was there? I was looking for stuff for yesterday.
You've been particularly good with this committee, and your predecessor was. But I think the Lords have been very involved.
I don't get
But for Parliament, if we're going to produce a report on this, for that to have any significance, both our House and actually the other House needs to discuss this agreement. And speaking on behalf of the government, because you do speak on behalf of the whole of government, not just in the Lords, can you give us some assurance that Parliament really will have a chance to debate? And even, I don't think they are going to want to delay this agreement. I think everyone's very supportive of it, as we heard. But that the whole of Parliament will have the ability to do that proper scrutiny by debate and, if necessary, by a vote.
Well, thank you, Minister. And you mentioned your interest. I don't believe I have any specific interest, but I would always refer noble lords to my register of interest. Clearly, I have interest in CPTPP countries, although I don't believe they represent a conflict, but it's important to label that. And just to refer back to your comment about the SMEs, SMEs should fall into categories. We have special focus on SMEs in the department. We're very aware of the need to support them, and there are chapters, certainly in our direct FTAs, that cover SMEs, and I think in CPTPP as well. So it's an important point to raise, but I do believe we're very much on that. In terms of sort of scrutiny, I believe the noble lords, will produce a report at some point in the very near future. And of course, it depends whether I'd like to hope that will coincide with the bill timetable that's going through at the moment. I mean, I believe our next stage, the report stage, is going to be on the 18th of January or around the 16th of January. Thank you. So obviously, it'd be very important that we can have the report by then. I think from your point of view, and I think I've talked to the chairman about that. I make myself fully available, as you know, for any member, particularly this committee, who wants to discuss issues further. And I believe that the Grimston Convention, which is a noble pillar of our scrutiny process, means that we would debate the report with the caveat of given parliamentary time. I mean, I'm personally completely committed to it, as would all my colleagues be, but I can't answer for the machine of Parliament.
Separate from the bill, we've very much stressed that the bill does actually only deal with actually some quite small issues of this. That it'd be really important that the whole of the CPTPP session is debated separately.
Well, I think the process allows for that.
Use your good offices to make sure that the Commons can similarly discuss it?
Well, I wouldn't like to answer for the other place, and I would leave that for you to make representations on that front. As far as my commitment is concerned, certainly the CRAG process is in parallel. It's not the same as the bill. I think people often confuse the two. But you're right. I hope the bill is relatively uncontentious and straightforward, and we can move through from that. However, I still think it would be useful for your report to come out before that process is finished. I think it helps inform the debate. In the same way, the TAC report helps inform the debate, and the Grimston Convention, I think, encourages a debate on the IAC report when it comes out. I believe that's the case.
Yes, we're very keen that it should.
And I'm keen that you're facilitated in any way that I can, given my constraints.
Well, that's a very helpful assurance. Thank you very much indeed. I don't think we have any further questions for you today. Thank you very, very much indeed. You and Mr. Cook for your evidence today. It's been very helpful indeed. Very good. And we will look forward to seeing you on other occasions.
Yes, I look forward to after Christmas.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Very nice.
Suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended.
I don't know what's happening on
The proceeding is currently suspended.
but we have to wait a minute. So, yeah. There should be one straight away after this. Currently suspended. We'll have to wait. Let's see who's in the chat.
The proceeding is currently suspended.
I can hear.
The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended.
They're probably having a pee break.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
They're momentarily just taking a break by the look of it.
Suspended.
So, go switch the kettle on.
The proceeding is currently suspended.
They should be back very shortly.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The
They're just resetting the robots, and then they should be back.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Home Secretary, welcome to this evidence session of the International Agreements Committee looking at the Rwanda Treaty. That's our purpose and job today. Thank you for coming. We do have very little time with you, which we're unhappy about, but we have to live with that. And I'm going to ask for two accommodations in that respect. First of all, my colleagues have asked me, so as to save time, that I will ask the questions. They may come in, but on the whole, I'll be running the questioning.
The main event.
Secondly, obviously, I would ask you, if you kindly would, to keep your answers as short as is appropriate for to give the right answer. And the final point is, if there are issues that we can't cover, would you be willing for us to send you written questions, which your office will then be able to answer, you'll be able to answer, but we would ask for them by the end of the first week of January, because we have to write a report quickly because of the CRAG constraints.
I'm completely happy with all of those. You have a deal, sir. Yeah.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Look, let me start this way. I mean, we know that the critical question is whether or not what you've been able to achieve, and we welcome a lot of it, let me be clear about that, like the fact that this is now a treaty rather than an MOU, which is one of the things that this committee raised when we looked at the MOU. But we are concerned still to know whether or not it's going to work in practice. And that's the critical question I think we want to look at today. The treaty does provide for additional guarantees, including enhanced monitoring, new asylum process. But the question is, how can Parliament be satisfied that these measures will be effective in practice? And I'm very conscious, and you'll be very well aware, that when it came to the Supreme Court decision, they were saying in particularly that the problem wasn't that there was a willingness on the part of Rwanda to meet its obligations, but whether in practice that was what was going to happen. So these are the issues we would like to discuss with you. So can I ask you this, to start with? I mean, how satisfied are you that there is in fact a willingness and an ability and the resources in Rwanda to meet the new commitments that this will provide?
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee. And I'm going to answer this, I think, from 2 points of view. One is the nature of the treaty, the fact it is legally binding, the fact it is a treaty, as you say, and therefore has a stronger legal underpinning than other relationships that previously we had with Rwanda and that others have with Rwanda, including the UNHCR. And so some of my reassurance is around the strength of the fact that it is a treaty. And the treaty was designed to very specifically address the deficiencies that were raised by their lordships in the Supreme Court. So whilst we, of course, were disappointed with the results, we didn't necessarily agree with their interpretation, but we absolutely respected their judgment, and we looked very carefully at the specific points that they sought to address, and those were embedded in the treaty. Of course, the treaty built on the MOU, which was fairly long running in its incubation, so we felt that was pretty robust. So that is one element of it, which is the kind of the legal reassurance that we have. And the other bit is a practical point. And this was very much reflected in the conversations that I had when I went to Rwanda myself. The Rwandans are very conscious that much more than the MOU, and indeed much more than their relationship with the UNHCR, this is being stared at, this is being observed very intently by the international community, by lawmakers such as yourselves here in the UK, by other governments around the world, both in Europe, in Africa and beyond. So they have very much a reputational incentive to make it work and be seen to make it work. And again, in the conversations that I had with the representatives of the Rwandan government, both the Foreign Minister and the Justice Minister, they are very keen for Rwanda to be seen as a country which is helping to solve problems in a continent which sadly has a reputation for exporting problems. So they really want this to work. And their willingness to engage with us, both in the drafting of the treaty and the implementation of the treaty, is incredibly strong. And that, for me, the combination of the legal robustness that I now believe we have got and the attitude of the government, their desire to make this a success and a visible success, I think the combination of those two put us in a very, very strong place when it comes to their adherence to the points that were made by the Supreme Court.
The problem from the point of view of Parliament and of this committee, though, Home Secretary, is this. This is a treaty that's not going to be looked at by the courts, because that's what the bill is intended to prevent. And so the only assessment of whether this will work is going to be by Parliament, and actually there's no committee matching our committee in the Commons, so it's going to be what this committee has to say is going to be at least very important. And you in your forward, I mean, it's a powerful forward, but what you say then is you're satisfied that this will work, that Rwanda is safe. But how do we know that when we haven't seen operating all the new safeguards and assurances that you put in place? How do we know that?
Well, one of the things that, being careful how I phrase this, I note with interest that their lordships relied quite heavily on comments by the UNHCR about the situation in Rwanda.
Yes.
I'm also very conscious that the day after the judgment was made, the UNHCR flew over 160 refugees to Rwanda for processing. And so through the actions of an organisation which is working with the Rwandans, they are telling the world through their actions that they believe Rwanda is safe for refugee processing. Otherwise, surely they wouldn't have flown those people there. The treaty that we have signed is more robust than the relationship underpinning the agreement underpinning the relationship between the UNHCR and Rwanda. And so as I say, I am confident that the combination of the Rwandans' attitude, their experience over quite an extended period of time working with international migration matters, and their desire to be seen to be successful on what is now, more than it has been at the time of the MOU was signed, an incredibly high-profile international agreement, I think gives both the legal, but in my mind, I'm not a lawyer, but in my mind,
Nick,
politician,
I wonder how many people actually get
seen to be successful.
James Two Kettles cleverly.
Motivation for them.
I mean,
I get it. I wonder how many other people get it.
That have been introduced, which haven't been used so far.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a new law. We don't even know what the law consists of at the moment, do we? It's going to be introduced by Rwanda.
Oh, in terms of
asylum law.
So that I think that will be part of their ratification process for the treaty. The processes, which are the ones we're going to be relied upon, are embedded within the treaty rather than the law. That's my understanding of that law. Is that?
Forgive me. The policy paper makes it clear that there has to be a new law in Rwanda. That's the law that's going to apply to the refugee asylum seekers. That's what they'll be judged under, but we don't know what it is.
So the changes in the Rwandan domestic legislation are to reflect that under the treaty they have agreed to fundamentally reform how they deal with asylum cases. So prior to us agreeing the treaty, they had a internal administrative appeal stage with what they called a Refugee Status Determination Committee and a ministerial appeal. Under the treaty, they have removed those elements. So they will be both ratifying the treaty, as the Home Secretary said, but also they are changing their domestic law and approaches in terms of the process to reflect what they've agreed to in the treaty.
Forgive me, my point is we don't know what those changes are.
They're the changes that are reflected in the treaty.
Is there a draft of the new law available yet? Do you know?
I haven't seen one, but as I say, the changes, the actions of Rwandans, domestic processes are in order to make meaningful the treaty, the ratification to the treaty, the adherence to the treaty. So my understanding is that the changes, I mean, when the draft comes through, I think there'll be nothing in it that will be surprising, because they are making changes in order to make the treaty deliverable.
And Home Secretary, I mean, in your forward to the policy paper, you said this, talking about the work that'll be done. This work will enable, I'm quoting Parliament, to conclude that the Supreme Court's judgment has been addressed and that Rwanda is safe for relocations under the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. That's what that's your confidence. I understand that. That's where you want to get to. My question to you is, we look at these details, how can Parliament at this time, before this has been put in place, before it's been tested, before it's been addressed, been seen, how can Parliament actually make that conclusion? And it's got no fallback, because the courts will not be allowed to assess the treaty's sufficiency after the bill is passed.
Well, their lordships highlighted remedies in their judgment. The treaty addresses those remedies, and so my reading of that, if someone says do X and Y, if their lordships say we don't believe that Rwanda is currently safe because of X and Y, and then go on to say, but we think these things can be addressed, which is a very, very strong distillation of the points their lordships made. If we then go on to address X and Y, then by definition that is addressing the reasons that they felt Rwanda wasn't safe. And my view is the framework around non-refoulement is very, very robust, and the changes which the Rwandans have committed to in terms of the internationalisation of their process, the degree of oversight which is embedded in the treaty, and as I say, the practical oversight, not driven by legislation, but the practical oversight of the UK's, your lordships, and the international community's interest in this, gives me that confidence to say that the two things which underpinned their lordships' then assessment of Rwanda have been addressed through the treaty, and once the changes have been made and the treaty has been ratified at both ends, it will by definition have addressed the reasons why their lordship said at the time Rwanda was not safe.
Prince Andrew was trade envoy once.
It's a question of practice. If I just read what the Supreme Court said, probably in its central piece, it said the central issue in the present case is not the good faith of the government of Rwanda at the political level, but its practical ability to fulfil its assurances, at least in the short term, in the light of present deficiencies of the Rwandan asylum system. I don't want to be the slightest bit dismissive of Rwanda or anything of that sort. The question is, you're asking Parliament, and that's why we're looking at the treaty now, you're asking Parliament to say, it's fixed. And what I'm asking you is, how can we be sure that it is fixed before many of the elements in the new system have been tried and tested?
But we're not relying on Rwandan good faith. That's the point.
No.
And so when their lordships say that they believe Rwanda's good faith, and so do we, and then they go on to say, however, there are concerns about refoulement, and there are concerns about the robustness of their judicial process, we have utilising the goodwill of the Rwandans, but in order to put a robust legal framework in place to very specifically and directly address the robustness of their legal process with the Commonwealth element, which should give us all a strong degree of reassurance, and that internationalisation exists at multiple levels, both in terms of the selection committee and in terms of the decision makers that will look at the cases, but also on cast iron guarantees about non-refoulement. So we have addressed the technical concerns of their lordships in the treaty. And once the treaty has gone through the legitimate democratic process, both in Westminster and Kigali, I believe we can legitimately say that their concerns have been addressed.
Of course, I mean, one of the problems that the Supreme Court did refer to was the fact that Rwanda had not met its assurances to other countries. So they believed from what UNHCR was saying at that stage. But let me just try and pick up on some of the detail of this, if I may. When will the government assess whether the agreement is fully implemented?
Well, I mean, we of course have an incentive for this to be up and running as quickly as possible. We have been working very closely throughout. We will continue to do so. The Rwandans will have a system. We have no intention of distorting their system, but they have an interest in working through their domestic legislation quickly, as do we. So these are current activities. I can't give you a specific, it will be at this point, but we have an ongoing relationship. So at the first point it is ready, we'll be able to point to that. I don't want to speculate about exactly when that will be.
Can you confirm that government will not ratify the treaty until the new measures are fully effective?
So our ratification process is running through the crowd process, as you suggested. The Rwandans are doing things at their end. I mean, the treaty until both parties, as you know, have ratified the treaty will be held in abeyance. And from the Rwandans' point of view, and again, I'm rather uncomfortable kind of implicitly dictating to them how they should do things.
Well,
but
I'm not asking you to dictate to them. I'm actually asking what about the UK's approach. I'm actually asking you whether you will agree, undertake, whatever language you want to use, that you will not do the process of ratification until the agreement is fully implemented. Because there's a lot to do, isn't there? There's a new law, there's a new first instance body, there's a new appeal body, there's a slightly different monitoring system, there's a lot of things to be put in place.
There are a number of things. I wouldn't describe them as a lot of things. There are a number of things. They're important. They're not inherently complicated.
Well, whether they are or not, well, I think they are important because these are the very things...
No, I said they're important. They're not complicated.
Okay, fine. And just the question, forgive me, because we're short of time. I'm sorry, I wouldn't normally do this to a cabinet minister. But, well, actually, I probably would. But we know where we are. But the point is this.
I want to know figures. Figures. That's why I want to know numbers. Numbers and how much.
This agreement until you are satisfied that the agreement has been fully implemented.
Well, so we are not going to operationalise this. Now, the exact and the only reason I pause is that the precise sequencing, because we have a process that we're running through, they have a process that they're running through. The point is that we are not going to operationalise this particular scheme until we are confident that the measures underpinning the treaty have been put in place. Otherwise, the treaty is not credible. We are leaning on the treaty for this process. We want the treaty to be up and running. We want this to be a success. And again, it's one of these things where I'm coming at this from a pragmatist point of view rather than a kind of legalistic point of view. The last thing I want is to set something up that's doomed to fail. I want this to work. I've said to my parliamentary colleagues, this is not performative, this is practical. I want these things to be in place, and the UK has an interest in that, the Rwandans have an interest in that, and none of us have an interest at rushing the fence and getting it wrong. So I can reassure you, and indeed I'll reassure my colleagues in the Commons, that we will make sure this is working, because we don't want this to fail. Neither do the Rwandans, and I think you should take some reassurance from that.
That's important. Just on some detail.
Yeah, of course the Rwandans don't want it to fail. Of course they don't, because they can offload a lot of their sick
committee members personally
onto us.
Quotes daily monitoring, close quotes, required during the initial enhanced monitoring period. And if not, who will?
So that is my understanding, that the members of the monitoring committee, I mean, particularly, I would suggest, again, it's a practical point, particularly in the early stages, for all the reasons I've said about our desire for this to work. So certainly on the initial cases, whilst the first tranche of cases are going through this system, I expect that there will be a very close monitoring. I think once this is a more established process, once people and the institutions are more used to dealing with this, the monitoring committee will make a judgment about the nature of the ongoing monitoring. But certainly in the initial cases, because because we are very keen to make sure this is a success, we want to make sure that the initial tranches are of a sensible number that can be closely monitored to make sure this is bedded in properly.
Well, can you tell me what progress has been made on establishing the
He's on about closely monitoring them. I take it he's on about the people that we're taking. He's going to be monitoring them. He can't monitor the people that we've already got in this country.
The draft treaties.
So how the hell? God, this is all smoke and mirrors.
I'll be getting in contact with my opposite number, Dr. Vincent, to get an update on where they are with the novel processes that flow out from the treaty. But, I mean, although it feels like we've been talking about this for ages, obviously the treaty itself has only been in existence for a couple of weeks, and I want to give them time to
I understand.
to get up.
You will also understand that we're under time pressure because we have a limited period for the CRAG process, and therefore we have to produce a report. So we need to know.
I appreciate that.
Do you know what progress has been made in recruiting the support team?
Again, there are a number of these logistical points that I'll pick up in the new year with my Rwandan opposite number. I want to give them some time. As I say, there are a number of things they've got to work on, and we'll do an audit early in the new year. I don't have a specific date, but early in the new year.
Can you tell me why the Joint Committee has a role in setting the terms of reference of the Monitoring Committee? And I asked that because I thought the point was that the Monitoring Committee is supposed to be independent of the parties, and of course the Joint Committee is an emanation of the parties. Do you know why the Joint Committee has a role in setting the terms of reference of anybody?
Yeah, so I can answer. I co-chair the Joint Committee. So we set the broad terms of reference, but the Independent Monitoring Committee set its own priorities and its own programme. So within the parameters of what the Monitoring Committee is asked to look at, which is the full end-to-end process under the treaty, both at the UK and the Rwandan end, that is what their terms of reference set, but they set their own priorities and their own programme in terms of how they look at things and have full unfettered access under those.
So what is the Joint Committee doing? What is it setting?
So the Joint Committee set the terms of reference and so its boundaries around what it is that the Monitoring Committee is looking at, which is effectively anything to do with the end-to-end process as covered by what was then initially the Memorandum of Understanding and is now the treaty, but they set their own programme in the same way that it's kind of customary for inspectorates to have clear terms of reference that are set, but then they set up their own programmes and have unfettered access.
I'm going to read that answer quite carefully. Lord Fox, quickly.
Yeah,
following
they got all those
who
TVs
controls
in front
the
of them
resources
just
at the
to play the logo on.
Teams?
Mental, isn't it?
Does that come from the Joint Committee as well?
So they don't have to turn and look up at a wall. They can look down in front of them.
So
they've all got a TV. I would just stick one on the wall, innit, either side. That's it.
So the Joint Committee is controlling the funds that the Monitoring Committee have at their disposal in order to perform their monitoring task. Is that correct?
So the Joint Committee of Officials oversees the whole operation of the programme, obviously under ministerial oversight at both ends, and we provide with the Monitoring Committee with the resources they need to complete their task.
Thank you.
Let me ask you another question, forgive me. What progress has been made in recruiting the international judges? Again, presumably the answer is nothing yet, or is it?
Well, so the answer won't be nothing, but what I'm not able to do is to give you details, because, of course, there are a number of things which flow out from the treaty in terms of processes, recruitment, structures, logistics. I haven't as yet had an update from the Rwandans on this, so they will have been working on these things because they know we're working to a deadline. What I'm not able to give the committee at this stage, but I will ensure that in the first conversations that I have with the Rwandan government,
we want
I do a
doctors, nurses, engineers, scientists, electricians.
you know, before you actually get to the point where you're drafting a report.
Well, it'd be helpful to have that. My problem will still be, in a sense, how do we assess that? But Lord Watts, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, if I can pursue that, because isn't the problem that there isn't that detailed in place? And wouldn't it be more sensible to put that structure in place and then come back with a treaty once you can tell Parliament that this is the answer to the question that is being put? Because at the moment, you have no evidence at all that anything that you've said this afternoon can be put in place in the time frame that
it's a contract.
You've been setting out, because
it's a contract. What we're going to take and how much we're going to give.
Well, look, we could have a slower process, but every day that we delay, people risk their lives in the Channel. I mean, this weekend we had another 2 people drown in the Channel. And so
is that on the French side,
there are competing pressures, and I completely understand.
I bet you any money.
We want
it's
to get
been on the TV more on the British side, and
we also don't want to hang
around
around because every day that we delay,
I don't know. Can anyone confirm
there is a higher risk
where
that
it
another set
happened?
of people die in the Channel, another set of people are brutalised by people
English waters,
and I'm not going to hang around.
I bet you any money it's been
on
that more on British TV, English TV than it has on French.
When I think there is an opportunity to work quickly, and I recognise that means that there are lots of things where you would seek reassurance that I can't give you at the moment, but I am confident I will be able to give you. So we're running a number of things concurrently rather than sequentially, and I think that is a justifiable position, because we are looking to address a really, really acute. A very, very serious challenge.
Are you telling the committee that if once this is in place, that there'll be no boat crossings?
No. But
that's what most people think. That's not the case.
Is he for real?
So your justification for rushing something through,
it doesn't matter if there's processes in place. There's still going to be people jumping in boats in France to come across.
Others have said.
Right?
I have never
Let's
said
face it.
That this
they can be talking all this all day long, and it don't make a difference. We've got to come down hard on the boat crossing. End of story. I don't care if you're a lefty. It's, fucking crossing the Channel. Come on. We should be stopping putting them in the water in the first place.
Of our era.
End
of. Something which has forced itself to the front of the agenda in North America, right the way across Europe. Basically, all the democracies in the Northern Hemisphere are having to deal with this issue. We don't have the luxury of addressing these things one at a time with a kind of a test and see mindset. We need to have a full push on multiple lines of effort, and that is absolutely what we are seeking to
How
do.
about
and we are looking
using
to
the British Navy,
right,
for what they're there for, or Border Force for what they're there for, to protect our shores from people entering illegally, not fucking escorting them. Let's get out of the fact. We're full. We cannot take no more. We are collapsing. Is that the way? Do they want every European country to collapse?
Of next year,
Britain's on the verge of collapse, yeah? Spain's on the verge of collapse. All these countries have got influx of migrants. We've got local governments now on the verge of collapse and bankruptcy.
Rwanda and
you know what I mean?
In order to dissuade people from...
And now we've got this Suez Canal. Petrol prices are gonna skyrocket. Nobody's talking about this bullshit that's going on in the Suez Canal. That our army fired a fucking drone out the sky from Yemen 3 days ago. It's getting beyond the joke.
There's no cap. There's been some figures floating around which haven't come from me.
But Lisa, we've given them millions to stop this.
We want to make sure that we get this
millions.
Right. We want to make sure that the initial tranche is a figure which is manageable to the Rwandans, but there is no upper limit.
Do you have a figure in mind?
Well, of course there is.
Forgive me, for what the capacity is that Rwanda could take.
It's getting to a point now of all these conspiracies when people are saying,
Well, there's a bit of an irony.
There's some outside
irony
force
about it,
controlling
ultimately this is meant to be
the
a
UK, and you know what's going to happen.
If this works the way we envisage, what we would see
something is happening. It's got to be West and people like that.
An increasing number of people as the scheme is operationalised and implemented. It then have a deterrent effect, which will then mean that people stop attempting to come to the UK, so that ultimately we no longer need it as...
But what you got to remember, everyone they're bringing in is future Labour supporters, future Labour voters.
There is no inherent...
You know, because once they get that little bit of paper, they can vote.
Determined by...
and 80 and 90% of asylum claims are being granted, so nobody's being sent home.
There's no cap, there's no upper limit.
We know that. 700 since 2020 has gone home, and that's combined of everybody.
Well, again, I want to take this opportunity to nail down an error that's been floating around. The Rwandans didn't ask for any extra money for the treaty. We didn't offer any extra money for the treaty. And there has been no extra money for the treaty. Where we have
that's bullshit.
Asked for institutional changes, which will incur costs to the Rwandans, because we are basically buying a service from the Rwandans.
Broke, he was going to say. We're basically broke.
Relationship, but there is no money attached for the signing of the treaty.
Could I ask?
That's a long pause. Don't like it when there's long pauses.
I asked about, how much is there for the monitoring the judges and all of that. But once people get to Rwanda, you've promised really quite a lot in terms of accommodation, free health care, and all of that. If I've understood the treaty correctly, that is whether or not they get asylum. Because I think Article 10 says even if they don't get asylum or other protection, they still
You're pretty much guaranteed asylum if you get across from France. So let's not bullshit about it. Let's give straight answers.
For all those people, not just there for the people who gain asylum, but for those who've been rejected as well, but who will still stay in Rwanda.
So I have a very high degree of confidence that the Rwandans will abide by this. As I say, for two reasons.
Bullshit.
One, because,
they're trying to ship them back.
They are very keen to be seen as a provider of solutions. They, I have no doubt, recognise that the UK is not the only country that is looking at a scheme of this type. We know the Danes have been looking at this. The President of the United States of America has been talking now about third country asylum processing and rehoming. So again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Rwandan government.
Why do we need to involve
they recognise that
a
the UK
third
is not
country for processing?
So once again,
we should be able to fuck them off out the door from our own country
and they also
straight away.
And again,
come on,
reflecting the conversation that I had when I went over to Giggle.
It's that simple.
That much of the world is watching. So everyone's going to be marking their homework, and therefore they have every incentive to make sure they abide by their commitments and are seen to abide by those commitments.
You've made that point now. Lord Kerr will ask a question. I'm going to ask a final question because I know you have to finish. Lord Kerr, please.
I'd like to ask a question and make a suggestion, if I may. The question is, when do you think that the judges for the new international appeal body will have received the training in Rwanda law? These are international judges, which is required by 4.4 of Appendix 2B to your...
I noticed they got off the subject of money when it was raised. They skirted around that, didn't they?
All these judges will understand Rwandan law as well as international humanitarian law. My suggestion, Secretary of State, is that you might want to correct the record on what you said about UNHCR evidence to the Supreme Court. You were completely correct when you said that the Supreme Court clearly laid a lot of weight on the evidence they got from UNHCR. You then made as if it was a point in contrast to the UNHCR evidence. You talked about 160 individuals being transported to Rwanda by UNHCR around the time of the Supreme Court decision. It is, of course, the case that UNHCR has for many years operated a transit facility in Rwanda, for individuals at grave risk of death in Libya. They are not kept in Rwanda. They are there in transit to the eventual destination, third country destination. You implied that this running this operation suggested that UNHCR might not mean what they said about Rwanda not being a safe country. Would you want to correct the record on that?
So I think, the points that I made were all factually accurate. I mean, my assessment about perhaps the disconnect between I think the very strong criticism that they made about Rwanda, which was reflecting their lordship's judgment, and the fact that they still work with Rwanda, I think is something that's legitimate to highlight. If it came across that I was suggesting the UNHCR relationship was directly analogous to ours, that was not my intention. If that came across, then that's not what I meant. But I think the broad point that Rwanda is a partner with the UNHCR, which for me feels at odds with what I read as being very harsh criticism of Rwanda from an organisation that still works regularly and closely with Rwanda on refugee-related issues.
Home Secretary, I have to say, and I didn't participate, of course, in the Supreme Court case, but you're very excellent lawyers.
I thought he was going to say Home Secretary.
If in fact it was possible to say, disregard what UNHCR has said because that's not the way they operate. I mean, I'm just very surprised.
So look, I'm not attempting to relitigate. The point that I've made is that we looked very, very closely at the specifics of the judgment and sought to address that. I think perhaps again, if I've taken us down a bit of a branch line, that was not my intention on that.
The main line, though, which is where I started and where I want to sort of finish, give you a further opportunity. Oh. In order for this to work, there has to be a new law, new judges, new system, new complaints. We don't know how it's going to work, and yet once this is in place, it can't be turned back. You will have got the system in place. We won't be able to get rid of the system because it will be there, and the people will go through that system and nothing else. And don't you think in those circumstances you ought to delay ratification?
Look, they ain't going to ban the old dinghies, are they? The dinghy factory makers. They're not even going to attempt to find where they're being made because they already know where they're being made because MPs have probably got a stake in the company that makes them. So why should they stop it? Because there's a brand new one every time.
I understand the point that you make. My counter argument would be that for the treaty to be meaningful, Rwanda will have to have demonstrated they've made some fundamental changes to their processes. I reflect on the fact that Rwanda has demonstrated a willingness and ability to move very, very quickly on their reform program, and it's one of the reasons why I think they are quite a remarkable country. And in terms of things like fibre optic, broadband rollout, which was happening in Kigali before it was happening in Dorset, as one of my ministers reminded me. This is a country that is willing to move very, very quickly. But ultimately, if the elements of the treaty are not in place, then
fibre being rolled out in a third world country, what would we class as a third world country
for the purposes of asylum process. But I am absolutely confident that the elements of the treaty will be in place, and they'll be very visible. There's no way of hiding. There's no way that the Rwandans can hide.
Let's wait.
Nor would they want to.
My point is, let's wait to see that they are in place, rather than rely upon your, I'm sure, completely well-intentioned, of course, confidence. Let's see them in place. Let Parliament see it actually works. That's my question. Why not?
Well, as I say, I think it's. I recognise the cautiousness of your suggestion. I absolutely do. But as I've said in a previous answer, I think the scale and the nature of this challenge means that we have, I think, a counterbalance incentive to move quickly. not rush it, not be foolhardy, but to work at maximum pace, consistent with putting the safety and the frameworks in place. And that's my incentive. That's why we're moving quickly. We recognise that, as we said in the legislation, this is novel legislation. We recognise that. The treaty asks the Rwandans to make some fundamental changes. They have agreed to do that and do that very, very quickly. But as I say, all the time that we might otherwise want to wait, criminal gangs are still plying their evil trade, and that is also, I think, a counterbalancing motivation for me. And it's a judgment call, and I totally recognise it's a judgment call.
I also just need to clarify on the terms of reference, before we conclude.
Yes,
the terms of reference are now set in the treaty, so the only way the terms of the reference of the monitoring committee can be amended is by amending the treaty.
I see. Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
Is the treaty going to create a new class of vulnerable refugees who aren't sent to Rwanda because it's considered suitable to keep them here? And how on earth is that going to work?
Well, there are points in the treaty. Again, it's a degree of reassurance in, and again, it's particularly tied up with the elements of the treaty that gives protection about non-refoulement. Is that the only place, if someone is sent from the UK to Rwanda, the only place that they can be returned to is the UK. Is that the point you're making reference to, sir? So that's about providing a degree of reassurance about
Anarchy Television. Like your comment, it's quite easy. They're getting paid individual as long as they can string it out. So the more words that come out their mouth when they're saying absolutely nothing, the more they're getting paid, isn't it?
We shall make arrangements to resettle here a portion of their most valuable refugees.
That's right. It's not suitable.
Maybe valuable.
This is extraordinary.
So under the original Memorandum of Understanding, part of the wider agreement was that Rwanda hosts something like 130,000 refugees from the region. These aren't Rwandan individuals, they aren't the individuals that are relocated under the treaty, and it may be, as we do with other countries where we have resettlement schemes, that if there is someone with particularly acute needs or specialist needs that could be better served in the UK, we would provide safe and legal route for that person who is recognised as a refugee to come to the UK in the same way as we have worked with other organisations such
or
as
the sick and disabled
refugees
then.
From vulnerable areas such as
That's
Turkey,
basically
Lebanon,
what he's saying, isn't he?
How many is a portion?
It's not possible.
We take the sick and the disabled over the doctors and the nurses and the engineers.
Similar agreements we have with other countries, the numbers tend to be...
I'm not being horrible. We can't look after our own, let alone look after anyone else.
So we're talking 1%,
I'll be called a racist.
No, I mean tiny numbers, like single digits of people. If and because again, this is not a novel clause. This is similar to other clauses we have in other agreements, and in those instances, again, we are talking about literally single digit.
Yeah.
Home Secretary, thank you for your time. We would have liked to spend more time with you, but we're very grateful for the time that we have spent with you. We will be sending you some further questions as we discussed at the beginning, and we look forward to getting your answers. And thank you again, and thank your team, your very large team, I think.
It's like watching bear
paint
baiting.
dry.
I think they've come see a blood sport, but you've been very hospitable.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wow.
Thank you.
So I think that's it, guys. That's the end.
The proceeding has ended.
Of that bullshit, which is madness.
The proceeding has ended.
So, yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. Really, did anyone get anything from that? Because I most certainly didn't get a thing from any of that at all. Did you? I didn't. But, yeah. Thanks, guys. I'm going to end it here. I didn't get nothing from that anyway. Absolutely got nothing from that. But anyway, guys, if I don't speak to you before Christmas, then have a good one. For all the people that celebrate it. Seems to be racist if you celebrate that now. But hey. Until the next time, guys, have a good one. Bye for now.